John St Hill. I'm the Deputy Chief Investment Officer at the British Airways Pension Scheme. And today I'm delighted to have the chance to interview Aaron Punwani on behalf of World Pension Summit for their series of board talks. Aaron's the CEO of Lane Clark and Peacock. His 25-year career has spanned some huge changes in the industry. The introduction of the pension regulator, the creation of the UK's Pension Protection Fund, and the rollout of auto-enrolment. So, Aaron, welcome.
Thank you, John. And I must say I'm feeling slightly underdressed compared to you, but we'll go with it, shall we? Yeah.
So, having briefly worked as an actuary right at the start of my career, and having sort of worked with you a few times and chatted with you a few times, I'm really curious to know what actually made you decide to enter the profession.
Yeah, thanks, John. And it's probably a unsurprisingly conventional story, really. So it was my second year at Oxford at university. I was looking for internships across numerate and financial services industries. So I applied for summer internships to actuarial firms, investment banks, and accountancy firms. And LCP was actually the first one to give me an interview. And I mean a proper interview as opposed to days of endless psychometric tests. So for an internship, LCP in those days, it was a simple interview with a partner. And I had my 1-hour interview with Bob Scott, who is now the senior partner of the firm. And we just had a really, really nice chat. And I recall, and whether Bob will still remember this, far less likely, but I recall he just asked, so what is it that you think I do for a living? And why do you think clients value that? And I obviously a lot of people don't understand what pensions actuaries do, and it really is hard to explain. So he gave me the difficult challenge of trying to explain what he did for a living. And then after this sort of rather sort of fumbled attempt, he kind of said, yeah, I think that's about it. And we had a really nice friendly chat, after which he said, look, I've heard enough. I think I'll take a punt on you spending 10 weeks at the firm on an internship. And I said, well, I think I'll take a punt on choosing LCP for my 10 weeks internship. And actually, it was a really, really good experience. Much smaller firm at that time, a really sort of friendly atmosphere. And at the end of that period, I felt sure that it was the sort of place that I wanted to spend the early stage of my career, although I wouldn't say I would have expected at that time that I would still be there 25 years later and hoping for at least another 20 years beyond. So yes, that's my story on how I joined the profession, how I joined LCP.
Has it changed a lot? I mean, you sort of said, you've been there for 25 years and you started off as an intern. Has the firm changed a lot over the last sort of, over your time there?
Yeah, so I would say, it's obviously a much larger firm. I would say at its heart and culture, it is the same firm, and it is very much recognisable as the same firm. And indeed, quite a few of the same people are there. But I would say, obviously, as a larger business, we have much larger clients as well. We have a stronger brand and reputation. We have more diverse services. We have more diverse people, which is something that is really, really important to me. And I'd say, importantly, we're a much more technologically enabled firm than that firm of 1995, which is when I started. And I think one of the things that has changed is, as we're seen as a prominent firm with a strong reputation, our clients expect us to be able to influence the industry, not just look after their needs. And so, building relationships with governments and regulators is important. And a really good example was our recent campaign led by Steve Webb, the former pensions minister, who's now a partner at LCP, which was to correct the systemic underpayment of women's state pensions. And, that was a sort of concerted campaign. And, the announcement from the Office of Budgetary Responsibility a week or two ago has now fully acknowledged this, and the government has agreed to spend £3 billion to put right this injustice. So I think that is not the sort of thing we would have been thinking about as being within our remit when I started, but now we are finding that we have prominent clients who expect us to use our influence for the greater good. And I think that is an important change in how we're seen as a firm.
Right. Okay. So the sort of scope of things you do is a lot bigger now. But so what about from the perspective of sort of the more junior people? Now, I'm going to embarrass you. So my research indicates that you were the youngest ever partner at LCP. So for somebody who's sort of joins as a young actuary or a young investment professional, sort of what does their career typically look like now? How has it changed?
Yes, yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, first of all, people still need to do the professional exams, and they are still known as being fiendishly difficult. However tempting it is for people like me to say they must have got easier over the last 20 years, that really isn't the case. So clearly, that sort of challenge of balancing professional life with having a work-life balance and also doing those professional exams is the same as it always was. But I would say the changes include the ability for our people to get involved with a much wider range of services. So not just pensions and investment, but also insurance. And we have new areas in energy and health analytics, and even people being given the opportunity to apply their analytical and technology skills to some really new and fun areas such as sports analytics and football analytics. All of those things are quite different and much broader than what I had the opportunity to do all of that time. So I think that's great. But I think the other thing I would say is that the people who join us now compared to 20 years ago do have different motivations. I think people are much more motivated by using really good technology and developing really good technology. People are more motivated by agile working. That's much more important. And also, and again, this is really pleasing, I think people have a much stronger social conscience and wanting to do the right thing and make a difference to the world, and wanting us as a firm to do that as well. And I think it's important that we reflect those in the opportunities we provide to our people, and we very much strive to do so.
So I mean, you talked a lot about sort of the technology and the exams, which, as you say, are what actuaries are famous for. But what's it like? What's it like to work there? What's the culture at LCP like?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say that the culture is very client focused, very modern, technology enabled, and very people focused. And I think the partnership culture that we have is very much focused on taking a long-term view, and just that fundamental belief that if we deliver excellent client service, that will lead to growth of the business, that will lead to the ability to attract and promote the best people in the industry, that will again lead to high levels of motivation, which will lead to excellent client service, and it goes around that sort of virtuous cycle. And if we have a people focused strategy that enables people to develop careers right at the forefront of the markets we operate in, then commercial success should look after itself. And I think sort of being a partnership and able to take a long-term view means that we can focus on long-term growth and development of our people and a really personalized client relationship, and not chasing quarterly results, and the belief that the commercial success over the long term follows. And I'm sort of pleased to say that we have achieved very stable and steady growth year on year over all the time that I've been at LCP, and that's very much part of the culture.
So you've alluded to something which I completely agree with, that really the client has to be at the centre of pensions. And one of the statistics which always surprises me is just how big a component of an individual's wealth somebody's pension can be. But the challenge is that pensions are a complex area. So personally, I've always found it. The thing I found fascinating is the process of taking those sort of complex ideas and then trying to make them accessible to non-technical, non-specialist arguments. From the sort of LCP perspective, what's the sort of the value that LCP brings to the table?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I'd say one of the answers, I guess, is the obvious one, which is if we make sure that people are really well trained technically and are also really well trained in communication, that sort of combination of technical skills and communication skills should hopefully really help our clients. But I would just go a step further and say that I think these days communication is intrinsically linked with technology, and so having sort of a dedicated and quite large technology team that can deliver a consistent approach across DB pensions and DC pensions and other areas is really important, because I think when you've got complex things going on with thousands of variables, being able to visualize data and carry out some complex analytics but actually present it in a way that comes to life and really helps decision making, that's really important. And obviously that's true whether we're talking about trustees of very large pension funds who are very sophisticated, or individual members of DC schemes, where just the right type of nudge communication with the right visual can actually help people make the right decision in a way that in a way that nothing else can. So I'd say it's a combination of obviously being highly trained technically and in communication, but also using technology as an enabler for communications, not just for institutional clients, but for end users as well.
And I want to tie that back to something you were sort of mentioning earlier. I mean, the firm has grown a lot in the last 25 years. So, back in the 90s, it was about sort of 150 or so people. And now LCP must be well over 800 people. When you're running such a larger organisation, how do you keep the client at the centre of what you do?
Yes, and I mean, I'll agree. It gets more challenging as we get bigger to do that. And I think maintaining the culture is key in terms of client focus and people focus, and those areas to do with sort of continuing improvement. We've never achieved the best we can be. We always need to keep moving forwards, and I think clients will always keep us on our toes in that way. But I'd say one particular area is, whilst we do a lot of centralized thinking and research so that people have access to it, we very much believe in trusting our people, our consultants, to give direct advice to clients based on their own beliefs and based on their clients' personal beliefs, instead of following house views. So the centralized thinking is there, but people are free to give the right advice that they see fit, and we have to trust people to do that. And I think that's particularly important and essential to keep that aspect of our services as we grow.
Right. Okay. So we're sort of talking a little bit about advice now, and how to give good advice. But it occurs to me that you're in a unique position because you get to see lots of different firms, lots of different types of situations, and I'm curious, do you see any patterns in or any hallmarks for how good decisions get made around board tables or around trustee groups?
Yeah, as I'm sure you'd see and expect, John, every trustee board and corporate board does have its own culture. But I think something we're seeing which is really positive is a major drive on diversity to improve decision making, so that boards don't just fall into a culture of groupthink or listening to the loudest person or the chair actually dominating decisions. So I think the best trustee chairs do find a way to bring in everyone's views and ask probing questions and end up with an outcome that is better than anyone could have thought of going into the meeting, and that's whether it was any trustee or director or indeed any advisor. And I really enjoy working that way. And actually, despite the challenges of the pandemic and lockdown, I think some aspects of lockdown have really facilitated that type of inclusive behaviour. So virtual meetings, which need a lot more sort of careful orchestration and planning, I think a number of trustee chairs have adapted really well to use that as an opportunity to actively seek inputs and contributions from the full board, rather than just from those that are most comfortable thinking on their feet and thinking aloud. So I think there are some sort of learnings actually from lockdown for diversity and inclusion of trustee boards that we should take forward even as we emerge from the pandemic, to result in better, more rounded and more creative decision making.
And do the same learnings from a trustee board side, do they apply at the company level as well? And how do they get implemented at the company level?
Absolutely, and I'll be the first to admit that we apply our learnings from working with clients to how we run our business at LCP, and that's how it should be. And I guess that's why, in a way, I'm in such a fortunate position to be CEO of the firm, but also as sort of a mainstream advisor to large pension schemes or large corporates, so we can apply those best techniques to our own decision making. But we're also doing a lot as a firm to target more diverse and inclusive recruitment and also promotion policies, and that includes partnering with specialist organisations to find candidates from less privileged backgrounds who can bring a lot into the firm. I'm pleased we've been recognised in a number of industry awards as leaders in this space, and again I would say lockdown has been a positive here, and the best example for me is how my colleagues at LCP engaged with the Talk About Black I Am movement in the middle of 2020, and I think there was something about the emotional circumstances around the pandemic, as well as the fact that it was early in lockdown, so people were getting used to using Microsoft Teams for large meetings. So the fact that we could, at very short notice, facilitate a group discussion of 200 people with breakout sessions meant that we could do that in a way that we wouldn't have actually done before. Everyone would have been, in a meeting room, clambering for the seats and working out whether they were going to get the sandwiches or not. So actually being able to go straight to this is an issue that is of widespread importance to the world, to us as a business. Let's have some really good discussions. And I think that meant the strength of our response was greater than it would have been previously. And I think that's just one of the things that has led to a step forward in diversity and inclusion at LCP, which is really important to me personally.
Yeah, and I think it's an important sort of dynamic that the industry is starting to pick up. So thinking forwards to the future, so one of the things which I did in prepping for this was I found out that you can Google how often individual words are used in the English language, and you can plot these charts of them on Google. And so what I thought I would do is look to see how often the word unprecedented had been used. What I found is that the word unprecedented has doubled its usage over the last 100 years, which sort of makes sense given the fact that in the last 100 years we've seen the invention of penicillin, man landing on the moon, television, flight, all sorts of like huge changes to the world. So, using your sort of actuarial crystal ball and applying sort of the idea that what's unprecedented, what's going to change. How do you think that technology is going to change pensions? Because you've alluded to technology being an issue and being an enabler for improvement in delivery earlier in our conversation.
Yes, and John, I think that sort of that intro you gave to that question about terminology and language and how it changes over time is an absolutely fascinating subject. I think in terms of the application to pensions and technology, I talked a little bit about how better analytics and better communicated analytics will help decision making. But I think it goes further than that. And I think in a way it's ironic because most pensions professionals are quite tech savvy. But nonetheless, I think in many ways our industry is quite far behind other industries in embracing technology. So I think going forward, we will see integrated technology platforms that cover the full pensions journey. So it'll be from members using automated online services to access their benefits, so retiring online. The members' decisions will feed directly into administration data. They'll feed through to actuarial calculations. They'll feed through to investment strategy implementation, the sort of work that you're involved in. LDI portfolios will automatically readjust in response to the member having taken their benefits. They will lead to direct links through to insurers for schemes looking at insurer buyout. So clearly, that's what should be happening, and I think the industry will get there. It will result in much faster decision making and improved value for money, and that's on the DB side. And I think there's an analogy on the DC side as well. I think DC members will be able to access high quality automated advice, which is really hard to get at the moment. Also, I alluded to nudge communications, which will be automatically generated for people in certain situations, because the right targeted communication at the right time has a lot more impact than scattergun communications. And I think this will cover wider savings, not just pensions. And pensions will be seen as a component of people's savings portfolios rather than something that should be managed and communicated off to the side. So I think there's a long way to go for our industry, but actually be quite an exciting journey.
So that sort of tells us, the sunny uplit highlands of how things could be in the future. But what are the challenges? I mean, what are the road bumps that might hit us?
Yeah, I mean, and it's a very interesting time and challenging time for the pensions industry. So in the UK, on the DB side, we're seeing on the one hand a regulator push for much tougher funding requirements. On the other hand, we're seeing sponsors being concerned about capital being trapped in schemes if they overfund, and we're already seeing much greater interest in contingent funding solutions as a way of bridging that gap, so that you can get to funding requirements which are prudent enough to satisfy trustees and regulators, but without trapping excess capital in the scheme. And I'd expect that trend to accelerate. I think the regulatory regime around consolidators does need to push forward. It's been moving slowly, but it needs to push forward. And I think whilst hopefully we're through the worst of the pandemic in terms of our day-to-day lives, it will still have some lasting effect on some sectors. And I think the catalyst for regulatory change on things like consolidators could be still to come in terms of the after effects of the pandemic. And I think all of those areas will be quite challenging. It will be difficult for pension fund trustees to know what the right decisions are in their members' interests. But just because it's challenging, I think we as advisors and decision makers of pension schemes do need to embrace that and get our heads around all of these variables to make decisions, because at the end of the day it is all about the members, and it's the members that matter.
Yeah, I mean, clearly sort of LDI has been a huge growth area over the last 15 years, and what do you see as being the trends on the LDI side going forward?
Yeah, so I think LDI has been a significant success and is getting more sophisticated. I think people will see LDI as one component of de-risking. So I think people will view investment strategies compared to things like buy-ins and buyouts or longevity transactions as being a series of tools within a menu of options in order to reduce risks. And it's interesting that buy-in and buyout volumes have held up really well, sort of 30 billion or so in 2020, and maybe 55 billion if you include longevity hedges as well. And I think we're probably expecting a similar year for 2021 as well. So I think, and then I suppose the other factor on de-risking, so we talked a little bit about LDI and buy-ins, buyouts, longevity hedging. We're seeing that for schemes sort of taking a longer term view, who are sort of much further from being able to buy out, say, they're seeing ESG as being an increasingly important factor. And that's not just to do the right thing or jump on the bandwagon, but actually as a risk management decision. So if you're a pension scheme in it for the long term, then decisions to do with the long term sustainability of the investments you make are relevant factors. And we'd sort of very much welcome this. I think given the vast quantum of pension assets there are in the UK, and pension trustees as investors do have the potential to make a real difference. So I think clearly the significant uptick in importance and interest in ESG factors this year will be a really prominent part of risk management processes for pension funds.
Okay, so bringing the time frame down into sort of 2021. To be honest, I never imagined that there'd be a year when the phrase "you're on mute" was used more often than "we apologise for the delay to your train." And it has been amazing. Well, it has been a really unusual year. What has surprised you in lockdown? I mean, what are the things that?
I guess on the how long it's gone on for to start with, I think none of us would have felt particularly good if a year from now we'd realised that we'd be in a relatively similar situation. But I'd say more positively, I think how people have pulled together and adapted, and that's everyone. It's not just the pensions industry. I think it has accelerated a number of trends in terms of use of technology and decisions as to when travelling makes sense, and as I say, actually the emotional circumstances pushing forward agendas such as ESG and diversity. I think those things are all related. So I think there are some, if you like, pleasant surprises from that. And I would say, and it's definitely not just LCP. I'd say the whole of our industry has adapted really well. There's no doubt that most people have some dark days. It has been going on a bit too long. People do want some changes, and hopefully we are on the cusp of that now.
So were there things that were better for you during lockdown?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose as a CEO that also is a mainstream client advisor, clearly it is helpful from a practical perspective to be able to go from internal meetings to external meetings without having to travel in between. Just the pure practical sense. So I would say, there are things you can do better. I mean, I have three young daughters, and that balance with homeschooling, whilst it's really challenging at times, I won't deny that actually it's been a bit of fun from time to time when you get a sort of a 10-minute break in the day to actually just spend a few minutes seeing what your kids are up to. So I think there are definitely positive sides to all that seemingly impossible juggling that many people are doing.
So is there anything else that you'd want to keep from lockdown as we go into, hopefully post?
I mean, I suppose I touched on the inclusiveness of certain types of meeting where it's large groups, and the people who have the best opinions are not necessarily those who talk first or talk the loudest. So I think we should definitely take that into account. I think agile working is here to stay, and people have proven that it can be done. It will be more challenging, I think, when we've got a hybrid of people in the office and people working from home. But technology will develop, and we need to trust people to do their best, as people absolutely can. So I think those are really positive. And then I think there are some quite unusual examples of what we've been able to achieve in lockdown. And just from an LCP perspective, you may have read, we actually had an ownership transaction at the end of last year in December, where we have a sort of a hybrid ownership structure where we're majority owned by the individual partners, but we have a private equity minority investor. And we actually bought out the private equity minority investor. The partners increased their ownership, and we brought in a new minority investor, and also provided some really positive economics to our employees as well. And it was a really complex transaction to achieve, which was facilitated because the firm had been so resilient in the pandemic, but also just the whole practicalities of it. I mean, it was a really intense transaction, and it was all done in 4 weeks from start to finish. So 2 weeks of due diligence and 2 weeks of legals. And again, that would never have been possible in the 2019 version of how you conventionally run a process, which would have been endless meetings during the working day, which would have been impossible to schedule, lots of traveling between lawyers' offices, etc. The fact that, and I wouldn't say I necessarily want to do it again because it was a very intense 4-week period, but the fact that we could have a really full due diligence process done by people working at times that suited them and meeting at times that suited them, and similarly with the legal process, I think it did sort of prove that it was possible to achieve something like that in lockdown. I genuinely believe, had those circumstances not been there, we'd have probably done the transaction 2 years later. So it's sort of quite an interesting observation.
So Aaron, I always enjoy sort of chatting to you. I always learn something. I've got sort of two slightly more light-hearted questions for you. So the first is, what's the best and worst piece of advice that you've ever received in your professional career?
That's a tricky one, and so I might ask you the same thing in a minute, to just give a little bit of advance notice. I think the best one, I recall a situation where I was a newly promoted partner, and I was asked to take on as scheme actuary to a fairly large client because the then current scheme actuary was retiring, and that was quite a challenging thing to persuade the client to do, and it was a good idea and they shouldn't go out to tender, and so we sort of went through the process of introducing me to the client and explaining, and the client was a little bit skeptical, and I had to sort of go through quite a charm offensive to sort of prove my wares despite being a new partner, etc. At the end of it, the client, who the chair of trustees, who actually, having gone through that process, we ended up being quite good friends, and he sort of said to me, even though I was skeptical first, now it's you and you're the lead partner. Do it your way. Don't try and be like the person you've just taken over from. You will never be, a good imitation of someone else. So we've bought into you. Do it your way. Be yourself. And I think that's the best advice. And actually, I've remembered that going forward and passed that advice on to many others as well. The worst is, working on a situation, a sort of a routine task for a client, and coming up with a better way of doing it, and being told we can't do that because that's not how we did it last year, and I won't be able to explain why we're doing something different. And I thought that was really the worst piece of advice I'd received. I think we should always be looking to continually improve how we do things, and as senior people within an organisation, we should always be willing to listen to people with a different background telling us how to do things better. And I definitely, if anyone colleagues at LCP are listening, I'd definitely encourage people, please do challenge me, please do challenge the supposedly more experienced people to do things better, because your own perspective makes a difference. So go on then, how about you, John? What's the best and worst advice you've had in your career?
It's always a challenge when the interviewer starts to get interviewed. The best piece of advice, actually, probably the most useful thing anybody's ever told me, which they told me pretty early on in my career, is just learn as much as possible, and then just keep being open to learning new ways of doing things, better ways of doing things, and just trying to master new techniques for understanding things. And then sort of allied to that, I think, was this idea of not being afraid to sort of share ideas. And having those ideas challenged. So yeah, learn as much as possible and share ideas, I think, is probably the most enduringly useful thing that anybody ever told me, and which I've continued to sort of like rely on throughout my life. And I've always said to people, just if you have a chance to learn something new, learn it. You never know when it's going to come in useful.
I really love that. Again, then what's the worst then?
The worst. I would probably say the worst piece of advice I received was sort of fairly recently, and that was it is possible to trim your hair at home during lockdown, and so that sort of, I got that piece of advice sort of probably about sort of 3 months in, and it was all starting to grow out a bit, and I thought, I thought it's probably possible just to sort of try to give it, to tame my hair a little bit. And I think, my learning point from that is don't try and cut your own hair during lockdown. And cutting hair is a specialist task, and not to try to extend my skills to that.
Brilliant.
Bit.
Well, you found a way to look very professional today. Yeah.
Both of our careers are pretty much sort of focused around trying to help individuals and groups of individuals achieve better long-term financial security. I mean, that's been the center of basically what you spent your career doing and what I've spent my career doing. So for you personally, what's the perfect retirement?
It's probably going to be a really boring answer, actually. I mean, I don't have any sort of grand or extravagant desires, post work. I really feel the need to remain active and add value where I can. So yeah, would definitely continue working for the foreseeable future. And I mentioned I've got 3 young daughters, and I suppose one of my main focuses longer term is just with the pace of change in the world, their careers will no doubt be in areas that haven't even been invented yet. So I think I'll always want to be there to focus on supporting my daughters to be whoever they want to be. And to be honest, if I can stay working hard and add value and focusing on helping my daughters be whoever they want to be, that's all I could ask for, really.
Okay, thank you. So hopefully for your clients, your retirement will be a long way in the future. Aaron Punwani, CEO of Lane Clark & Peacock, it's been a real pleasure chatting to you. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
And thank you very much too, John.